folks and 15 minutes. We're live. We have 7 folks, 15 minutes. That's 2 minutes apiece. I ask people to be timely and remind everyone that you can submit comments in full to the committee. They'll go to the committee and be posted on our website. So with that, I'd like to invite first up Elizabeth Matson-Bechard.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to comment today. My name is Elizabeth Bechard. I'm a mother who is deeply concerned about climate change, and I strongly support moving Vermont to a 100% renewable energy future that comes from new wind and solar and storage, and not old resources like large hydropower. As we transition to cleaner energy, it's also critical that we prioritize environmental justice. I want us to prioritize electricity sources that don't export harms of energy production to other communities, especially those that are already overburdened by numerous environmental harms and injustices. We need energy that actually reduces our carbon emissions, and this means wind and solar rather than large hydropower. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. And maybe related, Bart Bechard.
Hi, I'm Bart Bechard. I echo what Elizabeth said. I support Vermont meeting its future electricity needs by expanding its solar and wind power generation capacity. And conversely, I do wish for Vermont to move away from outsourcing its electricity to out-of-state hydroelectric and gas power generation, which simply moves the problem elsewhere. Thank you for your time.
Okay. Thank you. Next up, Catherine Bach.
Hello, my name is Catherine Bach. I live in Burlington. I'm a retired naturopathic physician, and I'm so glad that Vermont is working to become a state with 100% renewable energy. That being said, it's essential that the RES reform prioritizes electricity sources that are actually going to reduce carbon dioxide emissions and doesn't export the harms from our energy production to other communities. This means more wind, solar, and geothermal rather than large hydro. It also means we need to phase out the burning of anything, including biomass, renewable natural gas, and so-called other so-called biofuels. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak.
Thank you for joining us. Next up is Isabella O'Connor.
Seeing her on.
Okay, not seeing her. If Isabella, if you're on or coming back, we'll look for you again. Next, go on to Richard Butts.
Good morning. Thanks for letting me testify. I'm Richard Butts. I'm from Bristol. I'm on the Bristol Energy Committee and also represent Vermont Interfaith Power and Light. According to a recent REV publication, Vermont's 48th in the nation in generation of in-state electricity. That really surprised me. In 2022, we installed less than half of the solar than we installed in 2016. So there's something wrong. So given the acceleration of climate change and the need for every person, every town, every state, and so on to participate in reducing emissions, we can't just leave it to the big guys. I would like to urge the following. We streamline the process of installing in-state renewables, and we need to do it in a way that's accessible to all. Secondly, I'm particularly advocating community solar with benefits to the locale where they are located to increase buy-in and resiliency. It also allows renters to participate in solar or wind for that matter. We also need to provide, I think, a zero interest rotating loan fund so that low income people can participate and be able to lower their electric bill right from the very beginning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. Next up is Marcy Cass.
Hi, Thanks for letting me speak. I'm from Williston. My family and I support our state of Vermont moving as fast as possible towards a 100% renewable energy future. This hopefully not distant future should use energy from new wind and solar and storage sources which would actually reduce carbon emissions. Old resources like large hydro, which look like an easy answer to replacing fossil fuels, unfortunately are not. Large hydro damages our ecosystem by displacing communities of plants, wildlife, fish, and people. Also, large hydro dams release greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide and methane as a result of the aerobic and anaerobic decomposition of biomass in the water. Additionally, flooding enormous tracts of land destroys the carbon sinks that we desperately need. We would like our legislators to prioritize electricity sources that truly reduce our carbon emissions and don't do more harm than good. I thank you for this committee work that you're doing. I hope that the conclusions you reach will not leave us a legacy of half measures that bind us to false solutions and waste precious time. I hope you'll make truly good choices for Vermont's future by encouraging more in-state wind and solar energy. Thank you.
You. Next up, Annette Smith.
Good morning. I'm Annette Smith, Executive Director of Vermonters for a Clean Environment. Thank you for the opportunity to comment this morning. I really am appreciating the real world comments of Ken Nolan. And it reminds me of what I said at your last meeting, that do we need a res? I will tell you that how frustrated I am to continue to be working in Vermont's communities with inappropriate solar projects and wind projects that are proposed without any prior community involvement. I remember when we first got involved with industrial wind in 2009, where there were a lot of issues, and I have to say I'm sad to see people promoting wind without an understanding of what that means for our communities. But we asked, could we talk about the impacts? And I remember Senator Bernie Sanders, Bill McKibben, VPIRG, they held a press conference. The response was, we don't have time to have that conversation about land use siting and how it affects the people who live here. And that was 14 years ago. And here I think about your committee and who's on it and who's meeting, and how wonderful it would be if this conversation was about how to do community solar. And as Richard Butt said, to bring the community into it, to find the sites. I mean, I'm dealing with projects where nobody knew about, projects that have been in the works for years. All of a sudden, the neighbors and the towns are hit with these things. I give webinars on the PUC process. Nobody knows if the utilities think these are in the right place or not. We have a very dysfunctional process, and that's the conversation that I hope we can get to. Thank you.
Thank you, Annette. And next up is Carl Buchholz.
Hello, thanks for giving me the chance to offer my opinions here. I want to state up front, I'm not an expert. I'm not a scientist. I happen to be the chair of Manchester's Energy Committee, but I don't feel like I have any more expertise than anybody else. My passion in this area comes from the fact that I have 5 grandkids, and I'm very concerned about their future. And you don't have to be a climate expert to know that things are getting warmer, rains are getting worse, etc. So I really think we have to do everything possible to put up more solar, and sorry, Annette, more wind, and where possible, small scale hydro. One of the things that I really don't understand is how any system that has RECs, renewable energy credits, I don't understand how that actually reduces emissions if all you're doing is buying a credit that allows you to continue selling and burning fossil fuel. I just don't understand it, literally, don't get it. It just seems like it's a stupid accounting trick that lets gas and oil companies continue working. And the other thing I don't understand is how Burlington can say they're, a net zero emission city when you've got an electric plant, the McNeil power plant, that is cutting trees, which sequester carbon, and then you're burning those trees, obviously emitting not just carbon dioxide, which worsens global warming, is putting particulate matter in the air, which is unhealthy. It's like, I don't know, 9 million people a year are dying from particulate-related lung diseases. So I don't get it. I don't get how anybody would think of expanding that, let alone continue operating. So on my last thing, in Manchester, we had a community solar, a large solar array scheduled for Richville Road. The Energy Committee approved it. The Planning Commission approved it. The Conservation Commission approved it. The Select Board approved it. Every board looked at both the issue of flooding and the issue of aesthetics. And all the boards said, yes, we vote for it. And then the PUC shuts it down on the grounds of aesthetics. I don't get it. The only way they can do that is that they're using this, I don't know what you call it, tier 2, in-state renewable. There's a number of 10% from in-state. They're using that as a cap, as a ceiling, rather than a floor. Seems to me we need a lot more than 10% in-state renewable. So thanks. That's my comments.
Thank you. Before we close, there was Isabella O'Connor was on the list. I don't see her back. Want to double check? Okay, so that completes public comment. Thank you, everyone. And again, feel free to write to the committee if you have remarks that are longer and more detailed than what you've been able to share with us in person.
So that brings us to the 11:30 point. We've got half an hour left in this meeting if you need that time and can use it well. This time is set as a little bit of a buffer to capture some of your collective takeaways from this morning and figure out how you want to use your time when you convene a week from now. There's a helpful benefit here in having back-to-back meetings and that it will still be pretty fresh when you come back into the room. Still, the time is going to fly by because there is an awful lot that you haven't covered. And I think to points made earlier, some of these themes keep coming back and circling around, but you might be getting to the point where you really need some clarity around where the tensions remain. That's not to say good work isn't happening, because a lot of messages were exchanged here that moves things around. I do wonder, how would you like to, first of all, to the legislative team, do you have pointed questions from this morning that you're looking for clarification around? Or do you want to shift to a broader question around some of the topics? Go ahead.
Well, I'm thinking of what Representative Sheldon said really early on, which was we're having an inherent agreement over 100%, but are we using the same definitions to define what 100%, what that 100% entails? Is it clean? Is it renewable? Carbon free? So I still feel like we need to wedge our feet down through the mud a little bit and get clearer on that really fundamental thing. Otherwise, we could be appearing to agree and not really in agreement.
To that point, so on existing renewables, I definitely think we need to keep the same definitions that we have now. And so I just wonder if there's a lot of pushback against that statement. If there's any pushback against that statement.
I guess I would ask what that means. In other words, is that precluding flexibility? I guess walk through if we retain the existing definition of renewables now,
For existing renewables.
Right.
So the existing definitions of renewable, like what's allowed right now.
William, are you asking to
Well,
see it on the screen?
I guess, is it what's allowed or what's required?
Ellen, yes,
This
Ellen.
is one of the questions in the survey. So if you'd like to look into that, there were responses provided. There was some pushback on changing the definition of what resources.
For existing.
Yeah.
Okay, right.
Do you know off the top of your head, Ellen, which question that was? I can pull it up. Is it the current list of tier 1 eligible resources? Yeah. So the specific question was, should the current list of tier 1 eligible resources change? This tracking with what you were asking?
I'm saying for existing, not new. Yes, that it should not change.
So just to be clear, because I haven't waited, LHIC has the Office of Legislative Counsel. Tier 1 is total renewable resources. So that includes either existing or.
Okay.
That's how it is currently defined. It does not currently.
As always, Ellen.
Nuclear. It does not currently include nuclear. It does include biomass, large hydro, the other classes. And so to just speed it up, I saw in the comments the discussion around the inclusion of nuclear and the inclusion of biomass.
We need to have that conversation.
So it's not a simple question. There probably is some pushback is the summary. And the pushback mean actually it's real concerns. So those who were saying no to changing tier 1 eligible, we're talking about the need for flexibility in order to balance affordability and reliability. Those who are saying yes, those eligible resources should change. Generally, we're saying new tier requirement for the new regional resources, several comments about removing biomass, and many comments around expanding qualifying resources to include nuclear.
So existing right now, if we were to stay with the existing definitions, I think the problem is nuclear, and it's those who have existing nuclear contracts, which are, which I think we've heard from, and those are, so is there beyond that, if we stay with existing?
And then us, and Global Foundries as well, would like to keep that on the table as an option. We don't have any existing contracts out in time.
Yeah.
We'd like to be as an option.
Right, okay.
And in the comments, some of the interest behind that were to help meet winter needs and, minimal emissions emitting for nuclear.
Correct. The thought processes are already online. It's low emissions, low carbon, and consistent with the goal is utilize low carbon sources, zero carbon sources.
So maybe just to dive right in, I support nuclear power, but also I'd like to get something done here. And so, I would maybe keep things where they're at. And if we're looking to go to 100% renewable, address the existing renewable contracts. That's my thought. One of, I don't know, 30 legislators that'll have to go on 180.
So are you looking for responses to that thought? You've got a couple comments that are online and there might be more in the room.
Yeah, I'd love to I would love to try and move this issue, if we can. I feel like we're sort of close. We'll just find out if we are as close as it seems like we are, actually.
How many people would have something to say to this question? I just want to get a sense of how the volume. So, okay. I was wondering if you had so I'm going to start online and then come into the room. William, Chase.
Thanks. So I guess part of it depends, I guess, on what you're talking about existing in terms of whether, the existing percentage or the existing actual load or specific contracts. I guess I would just look at this in sort of two ways. One, you have contract churn, right? The existing contracts don't last forever. So at some point they're going to be either renewed or replaced. And then also there's some, with all due respect, it's not a dig, but for the last 20 years, I don't know if there's been any energy policy that the legislature hasn't revisited frequently. But nevertheless, I think future proofing is valuable and a good way to go. And we don't know what kind of technologies, particularly in this context, what clean but not renewable technologies may evolve. So I would be in favor of expanding qualified, the definition of qualifying energy under this policy to be all clean energy. So there is some flexibility in some parts of the law to define renewables creatively, but I think it should be more explicit to be a broader definition of clean energy qualifying for the overall portfolio rather than sticking with just what's currently defined as renewable.
Chase?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the question. And I think there's a little ambiguity about how exactly we're thinking about it. So I'll just say that as far as existing sources now being used, CLF is not intending to push for change there. But I think that there are things right now that are occurring that we would hope could be tweaked. So, for example, we would propose that no new wood biomass electricity generation occur. And we would propose, as has already been said by others, that if the amount of new renewables that is brought online is sufficiently large, then we don't need to really tackle the question of unbundling large hydro RECs, or bundling what are currently unbundled large hydro RECs. But if not enough new renewables are brought online, then I think that question becomes relevant to tier one. So I guess in summation, really, as far as existing sources, we're not trying to take anything off the table, but no new wood biomass. And let's make sure, please, that we deal with new renewables such that the unbundled REC question doesn't become one at the forefront.
So Peter, Senator Bray, and then others.
Rev also supports changing the language to make it that there's no new wood biomass electricity would be eligible as renewable. Keep existing resources where they're at, but no new wood biomass would be eligible for renewable energy credits.
So this would be a question then for Chase and Peter and others, but how about if there is new large hydro built, is that eligible?
I think that that's a bit of, it's probably more, that question would likely require more conversation than we have time for now, but I'll just say that building new large hydro can have really significant climate impacts. For example, if you build a dam and it floods a forest, all of that vegetation, all those trees, all those plants, they become flooded and they die. And as they decompose under the water, they release significant amounts of methane gas. And if you want to go get just an assessment, like a third-party assessment of what that can look like, you can find life cycle data from the IPCC or the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. They've done comprehensive life cycle analyses of that. So if you're flooding a forest, the amount of methane emissions and CO2 emissions can be more significant than that of using coal to generate electricity, especially for the first 20 or 30 years. So in short, new large hydro from a climate perspective in this region, where we would very likely have to flood a forest, would be a very bad decision to make from a climate perspective. And I'll also note that from environmental justice, from an environmental racism perspective, where these dams are being built right now impact indigenous people, their lands, their fisheries, their way of life, their health. And so that question becomes entangled with other considerations. So I think, we're not saying no new hydro, but I think that when you get into the question of, are we talking about building a reservoir that would flood a forest in Quebec, the question becomes much more complicated from an environmental justice and a climate perspective.
And probably smaller scale, low impact hydro would continue to qualify. Good question.
I mean, I think that the details will be important there, but in general, yes.
So Reps Bailey, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, just I want to throw a concept out there rather than really digging in on kind of ideological points or very specific nuances, because we're fighting for forever here. Maybe we should think about, because this is so much fun, what is a periodic time for maybe sunsetting the res or requiring, so that we can make decisions in different increments, like 5-year increments or 7-year increments or 10-year increments, because maybe that will allow people to feel more flexibility.
Right.
Brian, it looked like you had a comment.
Yeah. To that point, I kind of like that idea because of the fact that as technology grows, it's going to be changing the dynamic of what's going to be right and what's going to be wrong. For example, small modular nuclear is something that a lot of people are looking at for the future. There's also a lot of people who take exception to lithium ion storage because of the environmental nature associated with the manufacturing and the milling and all of that, as well as the human and social aspects. So there's a lot of dynamics that I think that taking a look at establishing a process for review and discussion as to the types of things that would be permissible, I think would be a great way to, make that a part of the effort. Because I think that from there, you can also do something relative to staging. Because obviously the one other thing that we don't want to do is to create a huge short-term incremental burden that is then going to create a flood of all Vermont utilities trying to go into the market to try to solve this, which is only going to escalate the price. There's a lot of dynamics that are going on. So I think a timed approach to kind of evaluating and taking a look at technologies as to how they move forward could help in this process.
Yeah, so if that's something that was of interest, it would really be interesting to me to understand from the state and federal players about the planning horizons that currently would, need to be factored in for that.
Are you asking for a comment? Sorry, Senator Bray, go ahead.
So one of the things on our agenda is to talk about what next, and we're getting towards that time. I don't know what other homework things might be suggested, but I do want to just say one, we didn't have a chance to go through the survey today. I mean, the conversation reflected lots of comments in here, but we didn't methodically have the time. I just wanted to thank people who participated because I know I'll be reading it again after and thinking about this conversation. So just because we didn't go through everything in it, I don't want people feel like we're wasting their time doing homework. And then that leads into a possible homework question, which for me would be something like, what is a successful outcome for our work as a committee look like to individuals? Because I'm not sure that I would like to know what people think success looks like by the time we're done, because by the time we're done, it's only a few weeks off. And so that's on my mind. It may or may not appeal to others, but I would offer that out there.
Well, here's an accounting of where you are in the process. This is meeting 4, so you have 4 meetings left. And there's a new conversation that just started to bubble up around a timed approach to evaluating whatever standard or guidelines are in place. A lot of this conversation tracked around 100% clean or renewable. As load increases, look to meet it how? What's the right level of renewables in Vermont? What counts as a renewable? There are questions that are further in the poll that you didn't get to around the how category. How do you do it with equitably. And I raise that because you have a meeting next week where you can still discuss this content. And then November 15th is when hopefully there is some insight from the Brattle Group on those macroeconomic questions that might go towards that how in terms of equitability and access to electrification, affordability of rates. So homework, I'm going to go there first. I really respect the time that everyone put into these polls, and you'll still use them, I hope. I hope that you are able to draw down the Word document that was emailed to you, because it does give you a little bit more detail on what's behind the yes and no comments. If you don't have that, please email us to ask for it so we can get it to you. The purpose there is not necessarily to get a straw vote. It's more to understand when people said no, what they were responding to, or when they struggled to answer the question. If some of you did midway through this poll felt it was limiting the suggestions there, then what were people struggling with? So spend some time with those poll questions, and if you have questions for people, your next meeting is a great opportunity to bring them to the table. This question that you raised, Senator Bray, around just really wondering what does a successful outcome look like? My hunch is that you each have slightly different answers to that question. And if you have an interest in answering it, to have a written format for that will be time effective, or, it'll save you. I don't know how much time you have to unpack it in the meeting if you really want to go over most of these poll results. That's just a practical question, looking at how many hours you have ahead of you. So with that in mind, do you want to float that question or invite people to let you know via email, or are you interested in seeing each other's responses to that? I guess my first question is to the working group members, and then I'll bring it back to the co-chairs. Do you have interest in submitting that kind of answer and then seeing what others responded?
I would like to ask for a little clarity about that question.
Yeah, fair.
Are you asking us what would a successful res bill look like to us? Or are you saying more broadly, what's the ultimate goals of this process and its outcomes?
Right, like by the end of this 8-meeting stretch.
Because I could write you something that talks about either, but they might be quite
very
different.
Yes. Yes.
It's disappointing.
Well, I mean, I could draft you a bill that I would support, or I could tell you more general terms what I would hope to accomplish with that bill. They're different.
And one of the reasons it may be more just, and not disappointing, but just acknowledging it's iterative. This is a very iterative piece. So your outcomes for the next 8 weeks, where were you hoping to get a response?
Well, I would say why choose? Like, your broader picture is context for the more narrow answer to what provisions of a bill would look like. I think the reason the question comes to mind is that often in working with constituents who have a problem, it can be kind of confusing to figure out all the pieces. But so I've made a habit of saying, what does a successful outcome look like to you? Because often if they talk about the endpoint they want, then it clarifies things. So that's really what I'm thinking about. And I would say on both levels, really.
So here's an invitation. We'll see if this gets to what you are looking for. Before the next meeting, if you have a question that you were hoping was going to get raised during this process and it's not gotten there, this process has not gotten there yet, that's what you're looking for. No?
Let me say it a different way. I know it's a little inchoate, because I think people have different impressions of what we're trying to get to in here.
Okay.
Some people, I think, would love the status quo, no change, but the rest keep on motoring it right along the way it is. But people would like to see a change. So I'm really trying to figure out what, sort of an ideal answer out of the working group is. And hearing from people in that way, could be helpful. Or maybe Louis just emails me and that.
Working group members, is that that was a written exercise? Would it be helpful for you to articulate it and to see each other's responses? and candor is appreciated because it's your time. I think that's.
It'd be helpful.
Sorry to belabor, but exactly what question are we responding to now?
It's the end of the meeting.
It's not the end of the meeting, but I also think this is a really difficult question. I think the question, Senator Bray, that you're asking is what is a successful revision or what does a successful outcome for this reform look like?
If you were a legislature of one person, what would your res bill look like?
That's a lovely question.
And maybe the answer is nothing. No res bill.
Thank you. Save yourself a lot of time.
Yeah. Is that the question?
I'll go with Lewis's refrain. It's more direct and it's got a little punch to it. You're writing the bill, what would it look like?
Unicameral, unimember.
Mono. I assume, I apologize. Jennifer, I assume if there was, this would seem to be at least to invite some collaboration among parties if you can before, when's this homework assignment due?
So you'll have a trade-off here because you have next meeting to talk more about some of the things that are inside this whole report, talk about clean energy versus renewable energy pieces.
All those little.
All those little pieces that are really important.
Yeah.
Or you can spend your time talking about what is, if you were writing legislative policy, what would it look like? And you can swap some of those ideas.
For me, this today was very productive and fruitful, and I would like to continue with that. I'd like to get through the survey and see where that takes us, because people did the homework. We can now have a week to revisit that survey, and I will. And then we come back and pick up kind of where we left off, which I think we also have agreement on, which is moving. I'm not sure when, I'm not sure the timing of each of the questions, like, or maybe I'll just move beyond clean versus renewable for now and just say, the devil's in the details on renewable and how it gets laid out, timing of it. What is renewable and how does it get laid out? I think to Laura's point, I saw a lot of nods around the idea of making the renewable energy standard potentially time bound. I think that's something for folks to put some thought into in the intervening week. Otherwise, I'd like to pick up where we left off.
So I would propose postponing the question. I mean, I think by the time we finish working with the survey, which we didn't get to, it was a good conversation, just as you said, good conversation, more in there to unpack. Maybe by the time we work through that, it would be a more timely moment to say, so what is your outline of the bill look like? Or what if we prevent this, whatever the question. I'll work on the question.
Okay. And I would just, of course, Madam and Mr. Chair, just remind us that we do have our legislative council here listening to all of us as we're working through this, and who may be able to help us with something that is down the middle of the road, interpret.
Because you may find there's some areas in there where there's closer collaboration and other areas where you're still needing to really talk about.
As opposed to, like inviting multiple bills to come in for reconciliation.
Yeah, it's tough because I think one of the things that's come through this conversation is that these things, if this, then that, is more tolerable. That kind of swapping is going to be your work next week. So again, a little highlight then. Yes.
So back on, I think it's great. We're going to pick up the survey and do more work. There was a thread in there that I saw, and I would just like to flag it ahead of time so that help people think more about it. A concern around affordability, what do we mean by that? There's quite a few instances where people refer to LMI, low and moderate income folks, and impacts, and direct participation in the clean energy economy. But the question I have is relates to, if we're going to 100%, then everyone is part of that clean energy economy. So what's the role between now and then of things like uni solar net metering, sort of particular individual efforts as opposed to greening the whole grid.
Thank you. You ready to move into nuts and bolts of next steps then? These are the simple ones. Summary note will be, we'll turn it around, capturing some of these takeaways. And I don't know if there's a whole lot to writing, but we'll at least have some breadcrumbs of some of the questions that we landed at the end of this discussion. There isn't any homework except to review your poll results, 5 questions you have for each other. Please keep in mind that November 15th is when Brattle Group data will be available. So next week I will ask you, do you have questions you're hoping to see or get some insight on from that consultant? Because if we can get them to them in advance, they'll have a better chance of answering the questions you have. So you can anticipate that that's coming up next week.
The 15th, we're thinking will be a remote meeting. You agree to that?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. The November 15th is when Brattle Group, because they're remote, we're thinking if we're all remote, it might be easier to hear and engage. So the suggestion on the table is to shift to all remote for the 15th.
Can you remind me, sorry, so the first, we're back here in person, but is the next meeting after the first, the 15th?
Yes.
Okay.
And back to the every other week schedule. You'll get an agenda posted on or before Monday. It will look a lot like today's agenda. Okay?
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you. I believe these were originally